Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week we double up, sitting down with Danielle Spradlin and Sarah Breiner, the co-founders of the Bold North Milk Bank. We talk about why there's a need for this resource in the community, why the pair are traveling this road, and what type of work goes into starting an organization like this on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Danielle Spradlin and Sarah Breiner, welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Very excited to be here.
So we are in, Danielle, your home, in your what looks like a dining room table, but you assure me is actually the office.
This is, in fact, our office. It's a multiple workstation. It's kind of like an open floor plan office so that multiple people, you see we have 8 chairs. Right now we only have 5 board members, but we have space for more people so that we can work on our milk bank.
So you mentioned the milk bank. We are here in part to talk, to learn about both of you, but you are the founder.
So we are
co-founders of the Bold North Milk Bank.
Bold North Milk Bank. It's kind of a good name, isn't it?
It is a good name.
Sarah came up with that one. So the community here needs a lot of different healthcare resources. There are families that want healthcare resources, and we decided that human milk is the healthcare resource that we want to focus on. So we are opening a nonprofit milk bank to help the most vulnerable babies in our state in the Dakotas.
So where did the idea for this first come from? What's your background or expertise in this area?
Well, I am an internationally board certified lactation consultant. Okay. I have some other fancy letters behind my name as well, but they all just kind of filter down into I take care of people in the postpartum period and make sure babies can eat. And I was previously employed at another milk bank in Minnesota. And I saw lots of interesting things happening during my time there. And so I reached out to Sarah because she's an attorney. And I said, listen, this is what my eyes are telling me. This is what my senses are telling me. And I just don't think that this is going to continue on and go forward. And so she gave me some amazing advice and amazing support. And we decided that instead of continuing on someone else's project that was being poorly managed and was not complying with things like FDA guidelines or Department of Agriculture guidelines, that we wanted to do it right and we wanted to do it ethically. So we decided to team up and say, you know what, this milk bank over here is collapsing. We are going to come in and we are going to be the sheroes of the day and we're going to save this system.
So, Sarah, you're the instigator in all this, then, is what I'm taking away.
Well, and I had spoken with the chairman of the board there about coming on as a board member and legal counsel, and I just had some kind of, basic screening questions in the beginning of wanting to know how they were managing grants and things that, of course, I want to make sure that anything that I am involved in is, operating ethically and efficiently, and had my own concerns. So when this all went down, I just said, okay, come on, let's just, I used to be in-house counsel for Habitat for Humanity. So I've done the nonprofit, gig before. And, before that, I'd incorporated a bunch of nonprofits, and my practice deals with business startup in general and estate planning. So those two actually go very well hand in hand with nonprofit work. And so I was like, we can do this. We can do this on our own, and we can actually maintain the integrity of the process. And so, and without jumping ahead in our story, I met Danielle now, 8 years ago, because she was my lactation consultant. And I was struggling with a lot of the things that new moms struggle with. And so I know her talent and, her capabilities. So it just made sense to, just jump on it and open a new bank.
Well, and it's really nice to have someone that you can work on a project with, that you have a good backstory, you have a lot of history that is directly related to the project that you're working on. Because we've worked, we used to live in Atlanta and now we are here in Eden Prairie. We've worked on nonprofit projects surrounding maternal and child health before.
True.
And it's always been a beautiful project. It's always been something that we were able to do rapidly and successfully and have a really good community impact. But it's always been kind of small scale. And because now our milk bank concept, our milk bank mission is the whole state of Minnesota and out into the Dakotas, we're interested in meeting with these rural communities and these underserved communities and the sovereign nations that are part of Minnesota and the Dakotas. This is such a bigger project, and it's an amazing thing to see that, like, we've really put in the background work of cooperation together. So, you know, forming up a board was super easy. We already had people that we knew who were talented and committed. And for every single thing we've done, we haven't missed a beat. It's been, well, I'm doing this. Well, I know you're doing this. You don't need to stop and tell me. Just continue on. And it's been so synergistic and perfect. I feel like because we have that level of organization, that this project is really going to be able to positively impact public health in a giant way.
So for those who don't know, what is a milk bank? How does it operate? What makes it a nonprofit? How does that, sort of all come together?
That's a great question, because there are other models for milk banking that we have decided not to go with. So as an internationally board certified lactation consultant, it's my job to help people who want to give human milk to their children make that happen. And for the preterm population, which the preterm birth rate is hovering around 8-9% in the state of Minnesota. It went down for a little bit, but it's on its way back up. Those babies are particularly vulnerable to infection, and human milk is particularly appropriate for our species, no matter what type of gestational age you are. We do know that these babies who are born preterm, if they're given human milk, they have a massive reduction in infection risk. And there's a particular one, and this is kind of the gory, horrible part of what we do, called necrotizing enterocolitis. And the baby looks all bloated and bruised internally. Sometimes the children require bowel surgery that has lifelong consequences. And some babies do not survive NEC. And we know that providing them with pasteurized human donor milk is the number one best protection, and it starts to drop the rates of NEC tremendously. This is just a common knowledge in neonatal intensive care units. However, we still aren't providing this resource. So, I think of it similar to blood banking, right? We've all decided that this resource of blood is important enough that we're going to share it. And people willingly they hop on the Red Cross bus and they give a pint and they get a cookie and they go home. They don't ask for money. We've decided as a society, we love each other. People will never meet. We love them enough that we're going to share this resource. And milk banking is exactly the same. But for some reason, because we can make a cow milk based substitute, we have stopped thinking that this is a resource that we really need to share with one another. And I think, mothers today are so informed. Fathers today are much more invested than they were, generations ago, especially in, taking care of the children and healthcare decisions. And families now know, just like blood banking, milk banking is something that could help their vulnerable child if their child were to become ill or to be born ill or born vulnerable. So the model that we're using is a nonprofit model. There are for-profit milk banks. That's a big medical ethics thing. We could have a whole 3 or 4 podcasts dedicated to medical ethics. And I'm sure there are people in the community who would love to do a panel like that. But the for-profit model really is taking what is a community resource and they turn it into a pharmaceutical product. They process it very heavily. They turn it into a pharmaceutical product, which they sell back to hospitals. And while the product does have some evidence for efficacy, it's not helping people achieve their breastfeeding goals the way the use of human donor milk is helping people. So we have a family, let's say the baby's born 38 and 5. So this is a full-term baby who's, pretty healthy and robust, but mom's exhausted. The labor was kind of rough. Her milk's taking a little while to come in. We can give that mom a little bit of donor milk in the hospital, and she'll use that as a bridge until her own milk supply is well established. And then that child's able to achieve exclusive human milk feeding, which we know has lifelong health benefits. So we're looking at this very brief period of time, this tiny period of the neonatal period, the infancy period. What intervention can we do for these families? And it's literally days that some of them are in the hospital. That's going to have the longest, furthest reaching public health impact. And the science is there. It's making sure those babies get breast milk. We're talking about the reduction of type 2 diabetes over generations and generations. We're talking about reduction in obesity and the comorbidities that come with obesity. And these babies that are going to be born this year that might receive donor milk this year, those children might marry our children. Those children might be the employers or the employees of our children. We want those kids to grow up healthy. Right? They're our community. Even if we never meet them, we want them to grow up healthy. And so that's why we think milk banking is the mission that we need to be on to have the best public health outcome.
So, Sarah, when it comes to the setup of the organization, which obviously is the board president / in-house counsel, it's part of your role, was sort of getting it with the legal side of getting it off the ground. Is it easier to do it as a for-profit or a non-profit? And if it were a for-profit, and obviously, as Danielle outlined why she didn't want to do that, would you have still been on board with it if
it was a for-profit? Yeah. I feel like that's a question that never would have come up because I know it just never would have even crossed our minds to do it as a for-profit. As far as the incorporation process, in the state of Minnesota or elsewhere, it would have been much easier to be a for-profit. Okay. You can very quickly incorporate an LLC, for instance, or even a corporation, and be up and running that day, so to speak, where, you open a bank account and you're kind of ready to go and everything else kind of comes in after. With a nonprofit, there are a lot more hoops that you have to jump through to be approved as a nonprofit, to be allowed to fundraise in the state and things like that. So you go through the same incorporation process that you do with a for-profit LLC or anything like that. It's a different, you're applying to be a nonprofit corporation instead in Minnesota, but really that's the easy part. One of the things that we had to do from the beginning was to apply and be approved by the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota to be recognized as a nonprofit, and you're not allowed to fundraise until you do that. So we couldn't intake any funds till that was done. So we did that right away. And then now we're finishing up the 501c3 process, which, then we can be recognized by the IRS as a nonprofit. And that's where, the tax benefits come into the donors and things like that. Luckily, donors can give now because it's in the process. And as soon as the 501c3 is approved, then it's retroactive. So it goes back to the date of, that we started. So anything that's donated during that time, they get their tax credit eventually. But those are the key things. And the 501c3 process is lengthy. It's expensive for a startup that has, no capital yet. Sure. So right now, this is a Sarah and Danielle funded project, but we're slowly working on the fundraising piece.
But yeah, it takes $107 in the bank because we're very into transparency. $107.
Well, that's what we started with. But I will say that we've had a fun week setting up a GoFundMe and things like that, that I think we're up to about $1,000. So we've raised enough to cover the $600 fee for the 501c3 application. And and then that can take anywhere from 3 months, 6 months. There are nonprofits that submit the 501c3 application, and it's 3 years before they're recognized as a nonprofit, because you have to show your business plans, your financials, your anticipated liabilities, what your salaries of every single board member employee will be, and contracted employee, things like that. So they look at every single piece of what you're going to be spending money on, how much you think you're going to be bringing in, how you're going about fundraising it. So you have to have a very clear plan for the IRS to say, okay, you've done your due diligence, you have a good business plan in place that will recognize you as a nonprofit.
And are there extra hurdles that need to be gone through either at the startup or as you go along, because it is sort of a healthcare nonprofit? Does that sort of add to the headache?
So that will actually be more on the back end.
Okay.
Once we have all of the infrastructure that really Sarah's putting in place, then we have to go through our different accreditation processes. So our plans right now are to be accredited first by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, because in this state, we are regulated as a food manufacturer. Yeah, isn't that cool? But
Interesting.
We don't count as dairy because women don't have hooves. This is apparently what the Department
These are the distinctions.
These are the distinctions that the Department of Agriculture has made, right? Because this is new to Minnesota. They've had a milk bank. It lost its accreditation. So now this will be our second milk bank in the state. And this one's going to maintain its accreditation because we've got Sarah for number one. And then after we get accredited by the Department of Agriculture, we will be also accredited by the Human Milk Banking Association of North America. And that is an international organization that accredits milk banks. Right now, there are 27 accredited milk banks in the United States and Canada. And so the former milk bank was 28. They're off now, so we'll technically be bank 29, but there will be 28 banks once we're up and running.
Is there a sort of growing trend of milk banks, being established around the country or globally that you're seeing that sort of give you the model to follow, or are you making the model up as you go along?
This is a great question. So the beautiful thing about the Human Milk Banking Association of North America is they are extraordinarily transparent and helpful. So there's no reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of shared resources, and they make it very easy to comply. So you have to buy the materials, and then you follow the directions. And I always said, Sarah, you're really good at following directions. Come here and audit and make sure everybody's following the directions. And so I've been through an accreditation process before. We have located people who we want to hire once we actually move from startup mode to launch, who are extraordinarily talented and have experience doing this kind of work. So we'll really be able to hit the ground running. The standard operating procedures, the food safety plan, these are things that we already know what to do and, how to put them together. So there's a level of creativity and making sure it all works and everybody's harmonious, but it's really just almost like a paint by number. You just follow the directions. And I think that's what a lot of industries are like, and people don't realize how much of it is just simply doing it the right way, because there is an evidence-based right way.
Okay. So this is still the startup phase. At what point, and I don't know if this is probably a legal question, when can the Bold North Milk Bank start collecting milk to be able to distribute? And I suppose the better question is probably, how does that part of the process work?
Right. So it's not so much a legal question as it is a funding question. Okay. So this is, the number one nonprofit issue, right? We have to figure out how we get our infusion of capital funds, because there are certain things as part of the food safety and the accreditation that we have to be able to show that we have ready to go, that we have followed those instructions. And it's really simple things like we're in the process right now of negotiating our commercial lease. We do have a space in Eden Prairie that we think is perfect for both the manufacturing piece of the warehouse and the office, running of the nonprofit on the administration side. But Danielle is really the expert on that. But certain things like we have to have our commercial freezers in place with the room established so we're to code with utilizing commercial freezers in the city, right? So we have to go through that process. It can't be on carpet. So for instance, we look at spaces and we're like, okay, well, all of their big open areas are carpeted because they were previously offices or cube farms or whatever. So there are little things like that go towards, solidifying a lease. We have to have a capital infusion to deal with the guarantee and the, deposits and things like that. And as you can imagine, 10,000 square feet of, office and industrial space is not cheap. Nope. And so once we have that piece down, then we can go through getting our permits with the city, things like that. That's the legal piece. And then we can place the freezers. Then Danielle can tell you more specifically how we go about screening for milk donors, screening milk that is already sitting in collection depots around the state right now that needs to be processed, but there's nowhere in Minnesota to do that right now. So our biggest hurdle at this point is not any legal paperwork. It is the funding piece so that we can intake this milk. We have donors that have already reached out to us that are saying, when can we drop off milk? And we have to say, well, we're in a holding phase right now. I'd love to be able to say, come on over, but we're just not there quite yet. Our goal has been to be able to intake donor milk by like September. Yeah. We're fully operational in the legal sense. Okay. So we are operating as the nonprofit right now. The only piece that's pending is nonprofit status with the IRS, so that when people make donations, they're getting some recognition by the IRS for that donation. That doesn't mean we can't run as a nonprofit. The biggest hurdle with that was the state of Minnesota, and they recognized us right away. I actually had a great conversation on the phone with the Attorney General's office. They were amazing. They were actually super helpful in making us get pushed through, because I had just a quick conversation and said, here's where we're at. We've got this milk sitting here. We want to make sure all that work that these donors have done, that's a lot of physical and emotional labor of love that goes into, pumping your milk and giving it to somebody else. So they were really supportive. And so, yeah, we're at the asking for money stage, and really saying, once we have those funds, we can go forward.
So there's a small crisis, which is that there was a milk bank, and we have donors all over the state that have dropped their milk off in community freezers that are those freezers are monitored and checked by healthcare workers all over the state on a volunteer basis. The milk is sitting in these freezers right now today, and it has no home to go to because there is no operational milk bank in the state right now that can intake that milk. So the reason why we've worked so quickly and so hard, and Sarah's so modest when she says that she had a nice conversation with the Attorney General's office. There are literally children, because we're home for the summer with kids, right? There are literally children climbing her physical body. She's picking up her phone. She's going, give me 2 minutes, running out into a parking lot to make a call. And it's like noon and the sun is beating down on her and there's asphalt. And she's on the phone with these people. And it's always a hold, right? Because if you call a government office, there's always a hold.
Always a hold.
And I'm thinking, wow, we are really brute forcing this. This is such a passion project for us. being miserable in the heat to be on hold with the Attorney General's office, not a problem. We're going to do that. Peeling the kids off and throwing them on the playground so that we can have a 5-minute phone call. We'll do that. So what we want to do is we'd like to get into our space like as quickly as possible. Sure. We've got some carpet to rip up. That's quick, right? Yeah. We can actually have our freezers up and running to code in a matter of days as long as we have the funding for it. And then we can start networking with those previous milk locations, those previous freezers, have them commuted over to our functioning bank. We can save that milk, commute those donors over to our functioning bank. And while we're doing the build out, because we do have to develop a 3-stage clean room and some other things for, healthcare level food manufacturing, we can network with other Human Milk Banking Association of North America banks, and they can start processing the milk that we intake. So it really is so much collaboration that's happening. But, we've got this immediate crisis where we've got to salvage this milk.
Yeah. Is there a timetable by which it has to be salvaged?
Well, before it expires. So, some of the milk, unfortunately, that's sitting in the freezers will be disposed of because it's expired. There's no way to know the expiration date on every single donation that's out there because they have not been brought in and cataloged properly yet.
Okay. So this is clearly a labor of love, really, for both of you, obviously. At what point did you know that you wanted to do lactation consulting? Like, where did this passion start from?
So when I had my first daughter, I had a really wonderful pregnancy and birth and breastfeeding experience with her. She's just an amazing little person, just a wonderful baby. She's the kind of baby that makes people think like, oh, we'll have 10 of these. And I saw all these women around me not enjoying themselves, like really deeply not enjoying themselves. And I thought, like, what can I do to help? Because right now I'm in a position where I'm doing really well. So I have some time. I have some love to share. Like, I'm not on the needing side. I'm on a giving side. And a friend of mine was like, listen, I think you need to just start teaching breastfeeding classes and helping people with breastfeeding. And I was like, no. I've got this career. I'm a freelance writer. I really enjoy this. And this is she's like, no, really, like, go do it. So I did. And my very first consult out in the wild was at Sarah's house.
Yep.
And
so you weren't even just a former patient/client. You were her first.
Yes, and she came.
See, that kind of feels like an important detail that you left
Well, and
out
here's
there.
the cool thing, right? So she came to my house the morning of my son's bris because we were on day 8. He wasn't feeding well, and I was like, okay, I know the health benefit of making sure that he can nurse before and after the bris. And so that was what I did. I called a lactation consultant that was recommended to me, that was kind of like known as the
granny.
She's like the matriarch of lactation consulting in Atlanta. And I was like, okay, I have a bris at like 4:00 today. I need him to be intaking milk and nursing properly so that I can comfort him afterwards. Because I feel like that's every mom's biggest concern, of course, going through that process is I want to make sure that, they're not in pain and those kind of things. So, and my mom was heavily involved in like La Leche League, which is a nursing support group and community back in the 70s. And so I always grew up knowing the benefits of breastfeeding and that I wanted to accomplish that. It was one of my main goals. And so, we were having a lot of the issues that we see lots of moms having now. Mm-hmm. And I did work full time. I was on maternity leave, but I knew I'd be pumping a lot. And so my goal was to exclusively breastfeed. And so this was my biggest concern, knowing the health benefit of, clotting factors and things like that when you're going through, a ceremony like a bris. So, yep, she came to my house the morning of the bris while everyone was scrambling around trying to get the house ready. And we were upstairs with, a screaming baby. And that's how we met.
And then, it's like a patient relationship, right? So it's not like you can be like, so now that I have your phone number, can I call you to hang out? Like, so I was like,
right. There's some HIPAA privacy stuff.
Little bits. And I knew she was an attorney, so I definitely can't be like a creeper, right? So like, how am I going to be friends with her? She seems so cool. And we kept like running into each other at like Whole Foods and like mommy groups. And eventually we just ran into each other enough that it was like, okay, now the professional part has kind of gone to the wayside and now we get to be friends, which is, it's a fabulous way to get to know somebody. You work on a shared goal with them and then you get to hang out afterwards.
Well, and Danielle can't help herself because she's just, if she sees somebody struggling, especially when it comes to nursing or anything parenting, she has to help. So even as friends, I'd be walking around trying to like nurse my son in a carrier, and we'd be out at the park or like the farm. We'd go to like petting zoo,
always
farm,
petting
something,
zoos and farms.
And she'd be like, how's that going? Do you ever try to turn his head a little more to this direction or something? And so, I mean, she helped me even when I was no longer her patient. It was just in her nature.
The consultant.
Well, it's really hard to turn off mothering, I think. Yeah. And lactation consulting is such an extension of mothering. I think we think about mothering the children, but we don't ever think about mothering the mother. Yeah. And it's really nice to have, and we don't live in these multi-generational communities like we used to. Right. I actually met Sarah's mom before I met her because you were still out with the baby for a little bit. And I walked into the house and I see like the grandparents are there. And I thought, this family is going to be successful, right? Because there's support. And then I found out they had to like travel halfway across the country to get there. And you need somebody there to mother the mother. That's what makes you a successful parent. And, I think fathers need it too. They don't like to admit it, but I think
we don't.
I think fathers like to have, somebody that they can have a dad bromance with. And, talk about the real things, because it's not always about the breastfeeding or the health care or the diagnoses. Just having somebody to acknowledge that, like, you know what, you really are trying your best and your best really is good enough.
We just have to recreate that village, which I feel like we could do a whole nother podcast on that too, of that multi-generational, there used to be women to show us what to do. And it doesn't exist anymore. So it's like, having that mindset of trying to help other moms if you've been through it and you've figured out something that works, or just that, like you were saying, just knowing that there's somebody there that's like, I see you're working really hard. Like, I see you. And, just really recreating that community we don't have anymore, where everybody used to live in a village, right? And had that community and support of other generations who had been through it. Yeah. So I feel like the milk bank is kind of that too, It is. Because it's going into the community and saying, okay, you need some help. I mean, there used to be things centuries ago, like if somebody was struggling, there was a wet nurse or there was a midwife or somebody there, there were always women around postpartum to help. And so, yeah, I feel like we need to kind of make that a priority again.
Well, and that's part of our mission at the milk bank that I think is a little bit different than some of the other milk banks, right? We all follow the same, like, food safety, chain of custody, HIPAA. We all follow those FDA regulations. But each milk bank has its own unique mission that they're reaching out for public health. The Western Great Lakes Milk Bank in Chicago, for example, they have a really amazing bereavement program. Lactation happens after baby passes, and families definitely deserve an opportunity to honor their child in whatever way works for them. And I was fortunate enough to work with some of those families in Minnesota whose milk was then going to go on to Western Great Lakes or to somewhere else in Minnesota, so that their baby's legacy, so their baby could make milk friends, even though their baby wasn't here very long. So our mission, we definitely do want to have a bereavement program to honor those children. But the larger mission that I think we're interested in pursuing is community organizing and education, prenatal and postpartum. There are a lot of groups that want to teach pregnant people how to have a baby. Like it's definite. There's like an industry of it, right? And then there's also community support. But what we're more interested in doing is teaching people how to advocate for their health and really take ownership of their bodies. Lactation is part biological and part choice, right? It's something that naturally happens after the delivery of a placenta, but you can either continue it or halt it.
Right.
And giving families that agency over their body and that agency over their parenting decisions through prenatal education and support, as well as postpartum education and support, is something that I think our public health system has forgotten to do. We're very diagnosis and treatment centric, but we're not very preventive centric. We're not very support centric. So, we can promote and tell everybody breast is best and all kinds of ridiculous stuff like that. But what are we doing so that best, if value judgments like that are really, they're crap. No one should say that, right? But we can't say that something's good and then remove your ability to do it, right, or put barriers towards your ability to do it. And so that's the real community outreach that I think we're interested in moving forward with.
Well, excellent. Well, I'm going to ask the last couple questions because you two have already suggested like 3 more podcast topics if this was what we were doing. So clearly I could be here for a lot longer. But
we have snacks.
Snack? No. All right. No, we'll be good. Last couple questions. Favorite Jewish holiday? I'll start with you, Sarah.
That's tough. I guess I'll go with Purim. It's so much fun having kids now and being able to do that. But I actually really like Sukkot too, because I'm a fall person and I love being outdoors and like building the sukkah and decorating it every year. And I don't know, I'd probably say Sukkot.
Okay.
Why do you have to pick favorites? You can love them all. So I'm going to say that even though I enjoy Sukkot the most, because again, like fall and being out is beautiful, I'm actually going to go with Hanukkah because it has led to more parenting hilarity than I expected.
Okay.
My children were born in Georgia and now they're here in Minnesota, and we did not live near a Jewish community. They were the only Jewish children at their school. And December is an amazing time to be a Jewish child in a heavily Christian school in the South. And my child's rendition of what Hanukkah is about, that she has told her friends, to her, this is a political action protest holiday, where like Jewish people are akin to the civil rights movement in the United States, because we were in Atlanta, right? So she's like, Dr. Martin Luther King would love this holiday, Mom. Do you think so? Oh, she just goes for it. And so that's why. It's not even the holiday itself. It's the watching my children intellectualize and enjoy this. It's just beautiful.
All right. Well, I have one more favorite. That's fantastic. I have one more favorite that I need to, put you to, though. Sorry. Favorite Jewish food?
These are unfair questions.
I know, it's hard to narrow it down. Right?
It's hard to narrow
anybody
it
complain
down.
about the fairness of these questions before? I mean, plenty of people have said that, it's so hard to pick just wine. And
that's the thing.
List like 3.
Yeah.
But, to call it unfair, though, that's...
Superlatives.
Life isn't fair.
So that's the thing about nonprofits. We believe that we can level the playing field and make things fair, right?
But as parents,
okay,
you have to tell your children that life isn't fair.
I just came up with a glorious idea, though, because with blood banking, you get a cookie.
You do get a cookie.
And one of my favorite Jewish foods is hamantashen. So we could give this a little twist that when you bank your milk, because we are working on a not to go off on another tangent, but we're working on some sort of benefit for our milk donors, a little pump perks program or something like that. So like, what if they got some sort of
Are you
like,
saying we're going to have a prom party?
well, yes, but also what if they got some sort of like delicious Jewish food that they got to take with them? And, anyway, my all-time favorite Jewish food though is kujada, which is a Sephardic kugel, like noodle kugel. It's like macaroni noodles with feta cheese and spinach. Oh, it's amazing. And I never knew it existed until I married someone Sephardic. And it's now my favorite dish of all time. It's fantastic.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's delicious. My mother-in-law taught me how to make it. And yeah, it's like my number one go-to recipe now. But yeah, if you've never tried it, Google a recipe. It's amazing.
Can you spell it for us so that we know? I'll
try. It's a QU.
Okay.
And so with the Spanish history of, Sephardim,
right?
Some say Quijado. I'll just butcher it either way. I don't know how you spell it.
Okay, so Google phonetically.
They say Quijada, but it's like,
QU.
It's like JADA. Yeah, like QU, something like that.
So
I don't
Google
know.
phonetically, starts QU, there may be a J in there, and go make it. All right, we'll have to find that recipe.
So, somebody Sephardic comment on the podcast, right? Like,
perfect. Do that.
Tell us how to spell it, but it's like my favorite. Okay. And I like triple the feta cheese because I live.
It's feta cheese.
Yeah, I live for cheese.
This is hard. So I like all food a lot. You know what? Let's do carbs. We're going to say latkes or challah.
Okay.
Because you can put anything on top of them and change it to another cuisine for your guests if they're not into Jewish food, right? Like you can turn a latke into like a tortilla
but
and make a taco.
You not be into those two? It's fried potato and bread.
Fried potato and bread.
Not like those.
And it's a food that no kid will say no to.
No kid will say no.
Universal foods, no matter your religion.
Yeah. Well,
I feel like.
And then my sister will also sometimes bring me challah when she visits from LA, and she'll actually bake it, and then she'll carry it on the plane like a little old lady, and she'll carry multiple loaves of challah through TSA. And I just love that everybody's like accepting of this.
That's dedication.
Yeah, and TSA seems to
good.
understand. Like, do not mess with that lady's bread. And I respect that, right? It's like a powerful food.
No, absolutely. Well, Sarah Breiner, Danielle Spradlin, thank you very much for joining us this week, and best of luck with the Bold North Milk Bank as it rolls on towards a hopeful launch date in the fall.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thanks so much to Danielle and Sarah for joining us this week. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. We're available anywhere you listen to podcasts these days. If you have a suggestion of somebody who'd be a great interview for the pod, please let me know. You can email me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.